Hi, and thanks for coming. This is what I'm reading from. To my surprise, when I started writing it, it ended up being what they call a young adult novel. The main character is 12, and not having children, I had to learn a lot in order to do this. So what I'm going to do is read some important parts of the beginning and kind of fill in with what happened before and in between. So, Siljeea Magic is about Andrea. She's 12. Her mother works at home on her computer. Her stepfather works all the time at his computer business. Andrea has a 5-year-old brother named Jake, who is, of course, a pain. And she likes to read books about heroes who save the kingdom or save the world. Andrea's family moves to a big new house in the country. They'd lived in a suburb of Boston. And it's a house on a street full of big new houses. And Andrea has to start a new school in the middle of the year. She doesn't make any friends. To get away from her brother and to find a place to read in peace, Andrea discovers a path in the woods behind their house, their new house, and she finds a beautiful grove of pine trees. And here's Andrea. These woods seemed huge to me. I was used to streets, sidewalks, tiny lawns, carefully tended playgrounds. The path had disappeared, but I didn't care. I had found my new reading spot, my escape. Sitting down with my back against a smooth pine tree trunk, I pulled out my book, set my apple beside me, and started to read. Something made me look up. A small person stood there, just on the edge of the trees and brush that lined my pine grove. I'd seen these people when we drove along big highways to visit my grandmother in her condo, but I didn't think they could be real. The small person wore an ancient t-shirt that had once been blue. Now most of the color had faded away, as if someone had left it out in the sun for months. The shirt stretched tightly over a muscled chest. Unless these people were completely different from humans, he was male. His jeans were just as faded as his shirt, cut off raggedly at the knee. He was short, about 4 feet tall. His feet were bare, with too many toes. Determinedly not looking at his feet, I met his eyes. They were brightly dark, a little too big for his pointed nose and chin. A shock of dusty brown hair stood up around his head. What I'd taken for brown skin while watching these people from our car turned out to be kind of a deep tan color, covered with very soft hair, like the almost invisible fuzz that grew on Jake's head when he was tiny. His skin and hair matched the rusty brown pine needles at his feet. The feet with the extra toes. Very slowly, I picked up my apple and held it out to him, as if he were a wild animal. His eyes followed my every move. Gently, I rolled the apple toward him. He stepped forward, picked it up, and stepped back into the shelter of the trees all in one graceful flow. He smelled the apple, took a bite, and smiled at me. "Erustak," he said, hand pointing to his chest. "Andrea," I said, pointing to myself. "You do see me." I wasn't too sure I did see him. I mean, maybe I'd read too many stories. "Yes," I said. "Nayach do not see us." Am I a Nayach? "Nayach," he said, correcting my pronunciation. "Yes, you are." I am a bocage. Do the bocage live in these woods? Yes. He tilted his head from side to side, whatever that meant. Always we live in Bezois near Nyack. How could I be imagining this? I try to write stories like the one I like to read. They were awful. Never in a million years could I imagine someone like this. I think I always saw you, I said, when I was younger, driving. That makes sense to him. Driving on the big road. I gestured in the direction of the highway that bordered the woods. You do sit here to find us? No, I thought I imagined seeing you, that you weren't real. Still not sure you're real. Slowly, as if I were the wild animal, Aristarch walked over to me, sat down next to me, put his hand on my arm. It felt warm, and it had the usual 5 fingers. Both are real, he told me, each of us. Always I have wanted to meet Nyack. Never before has one seen us. I put my hand on his arm, on the soft, fine hair. I could smell him now. Leaves, rain, a faint odor of sweat. Fantasies didn't have smells, did they? His teeth were white and slightly pointed. But his ears were not pointed. They were as ordinary as my ears. I mean, any forest being I'd ever read about had pointed ears. In my imagination, he would have pointed ears. Then I took in what he'd said. Never? If no one else ever saw the bocage, why could I see them? Never in Argenteuil, he said. I know not of others. Okay, were these woods, Bezois, Argenteuil, too many new words? You do have bookin', he said, touching a page of my discarded paperback with a reverent finger. I love books. I do read, he said proudly. Magazina, brought by the Immonen. Who are the Immonen? That word at least I could pronounce. Aristarch explained that the bocage have a group who forages for them from dumpsters and the little malls that have the fast food restaurants, dry cleaning. They find clothes, like the one Aristarch was wearing, and they find books and magazines so they can learn about the Nyack. Explaining all that took long enough so the sun had almost set. Mom would be wondering where I was. I have to go, I said. Can we meet again? Sunrise, sunfall are the best. Tomorrow was Saturday. Sunrise tomorrow, I told him. If he wasn't there, I'd imagined the whole thing and could go back to my boring life. So Andrea keeps meeting with Erau, as she calls him. She learns how to eat ferns. She learns how to bury acorns so they'll be soft enough to eat. She learns how to climb trees. She also learns that nodding yes is insulting. Bocage tilt their head to say yes. Nodding means you are the kind of person who falls asleep and endangers everyone. Andrea loves the woods. Then, some bulldozers appear at the end of the road where the path into the woods begins. Andrea's stepfather explains that their road will be expanded into the woods with a lot more new houses. When she tells Arrow this, he says, the Holt will rage. The Holt, he explains, is their leader. The Holt hates the idea of moving. Arrow says that he may not be able to meet with Andrea every day. For a whole week, Arrow did not appear. I went out every morning looking for him, wondering how long I'd still be able to wander around the woods before they filled up with houses. One morning, I got there when it was still dark, even before the birds had started their morning cheeping. In between cursing the bulldozers, I was cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. Then I tripped over something, almost landing on my face. That got me to stop cursing and pay attention to the dark woods. I'd never been here when it was so dark. Too early, I thought, and decided to turn back. Someone grabbed my arm. I kicked. I scratched. I even bit their fingers. But another one swept my legs out from under me, and someone else sat on me and tied my hand. 3 of them, all smelling like dirt and sweat. They jammed a smelly bag over my head. They picked me up. One carried my shoulders and one my feet, bouncing me horribly. The bag got in my mouth, tasting like spoiled meat smells. The combination made me feel sick. I gritted my teeth to keep from throwing up. After a couple of forevers, they set me on my feet, grabbed my shoulders, and pushed me along in front of them down some kind of hill. When I stumbled and fell, there was cold dirt under my fingers. But I was scooped up and pushed along, forced to keep moving. For what felt like hours, we walked down a long slope. We hadn't climbed a fence or crossed the road or a highway, and those were the only way out of the woods. But we'd run and walked for such a long time that we had to be far beyond the forest that Arau and I had explored. The ground flattened out. We walked a little more, then stopped. One of my captors pulled the nasty bag from my head. Trying to spit out the taste, I blinked in reddish light. We stood in a cave. The walls were rock, lit by torches and by a fire pit in the center of the room. It looked like something out of the stories I love so much. I did not love this. A group of the bocage gathered at the far end of the space, where a man sat in a large wooden chair. Behind the man in the chair stood an older woman, taller than any of the bocage. Her clothes were pale, almost white. Her thatch of hair was mostly gray. She was beautiful and frightening. I couldn't stop looking at her. "Holt, I bring the Nayach," said a voice behind me, and I was pushed to my knees. "Nayach, you will look at me." I stared up at the man in the big chair. Although he was definitely one of the bocage, he had huge shoulders that looked even bigger because of his bushy beard. He glowered at me out of little glittering eyes. "Nayach," he rumbled again, making the word sound like a curse. Even his voice was big. "You have seduced Errol Stark. You have told him lies." I must be dreaming, I thought. My mouth was dry and sticky, just like it gets when I sleep too long. "I'm having a nightmare." "Oh, don't be silly," I said. "I couldn't seduce anyone. And what kind of lies do you think I've told?" Behind me, one of my captors gasped and pushed me flat in the dirt. "Speak not such Allhaven to our Holt," he growled. This nightmare refused to give up. I tried to spit dirt out of my mouth, but had no saliva to spit with. I climbed to my feet, hoping the movement would wake me up. What the heck do you want?" I asked. My captor spun me around and slapped me. It hurt. My dream monster never slapped me. Slaps were supposed to wake you up. But I was still in the cave, sitting in the dirt, with my face stinging and my jaw hurting. "Vask," said the Holt. "Bring it to me." Vask, the one who slapped me, dragged me up to the feet of the Holt. You will not meet Erostak, said the Holt. You will not tell lies about our lands. Swear. My mouth was too full of blood and dirt for me to speak. Without thinking, I nodded my head. People screamed. The Holt roared and jumped off his chair. Vas grabbed my arms and held me while the Holt came down from his throne and put his face close to mine. His teeth were yellow and his breath smelled awful. Uvdask! He yelled. Gotaz! Okay, this is not a nightmare. This is horribly real, and these people are going to kill me. But then the Holt froze. A tall woman had come forward. This is not wise, she said. If you hurt or steal a Nayat's child, hunters do come to our bezoar, night and day. They cannot see us. This Nayat's child does see us. Erostak is your grandson. He may have some of your Siljeea magic. A boy? Boys never have such skill. She turned to Vask with a cold smile that made me shiver. Your face bleeds, she said. Did the Nayat's child see you close enough to scratch you? Vask clearly didn't want to answer. The Siljeea stepped toward him and his fellow kidnappers. One of them cracked and started to talk. I didn't blame him. This woman had power. She did see us. She did run away and fight, the kidnapper blurted. The Siljeea looked at me, and I knew why he tattled. Her eyes saw right through to the back of my soul. Who have you told of the bocage? No one, I mumbled through my hurt mouth. The Siljeea picked up a cup of wonderful water and gave it to me. Who have you told? She asked when I'd rinsed out the dirt and swallowed the rest of the water. No one. If I did tell anyone, they wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was crazy. They'd lock me up. As I thought. The Holt was still furious. She seduced your grandson into showing our bezoar. She insulted me. Did you do this? Erostak came to look at me, and when I saw him, he wanted to be friends. I didn't mean an insult. We say yes differently from you, and you heard me until I couldn't think. Go ahead, keep me here and see what happens to your bezoar. Then I glared. Oh, heaven must be punished, Siljeea, the Holt said. With that head turn, what said you? I will not tell Erostak lies. After all, I hadn't told him lies, and I didn't plan to. The Siljeea turned her calm and terrible gaze on the Holt. Satisfied, are you, Wubek? She asked him, in a tone that insisted the answer had better be yes, ma'am. Away, Vask, he said, waving a fat arm. Take her. And Vask was picking up the bag to put over my head again when the Siljeea kicked it away. Mazot, all of you, she said. I will take her. The Holt opened his mouth. Do not be hulpak, Wuba, she said. Do you wish our woods to be filled with searchers day and night? They cannot see us, said the Holt. They can frighten the animals, crush the plants, make it hard for the imminent to move around them. We will grow hungry. A muttering arose among the other bocage. The Holt frowned it into a silence, which thickened around us. Take her, he said finally. The Siljeea took my hand, leading me out of the big cave room and up the long hill that led down to the bocage kingdom. Head aching, mouth throbbing, I plodded along behind her. And suddenly we were outside, back in the woods. The The summer sunrise blinded me, making my eyes tear, and then I was crying. The Siljeea sat me down and produced an ordinary plastic bottle of water. At first I was crying too hard to even take a sip. After I stopped sobbing, I drank it in about 3 swallows, fished in my pocket for a tissue to blow my nose, and looked around. Around us were rocks as tall as our 2-story house. I thought Erau and I had explored the whole woods, but I'd never seen any rocks, let alone huge ones like these. No one sees our rocks who cannot see us, said the Siljeea. Even then, I hide us. You have been near here many times without seeing the rocks. Wuba forgets these things. He fears for his power. I felt a little better because of the water, and because the big evil Huld had a stupid name. Wuba, I thought to myself. Wuba. Oh, Aristok, I said, will he be okay? He will be sent to another Jumate. Boys go when they have 14 years. He will only go a little early. Boys go to learn from others and find mates. Now we must return you. My parents, I said, they can't see me like this, all these scratches. I can never explain it. Worry not. Walk. We walked through the woods. I had a million questions, but I didn't want to ask any of them because my mouth hurt. Not as much as it did. My head didn't hurt anymore either. And there was our house. She had led me to the fence along our backyard. After Arrow's climbing lessons, going over the fence was no problem. I felt much better. From the other side of the chain link, the Siljeea smiled at me. You will sleep now, she said. I curled up under a rhododendron bush and conked out. My mom believed the explanation that I'd gone out for an early walk and fallen asleep in the grass. It helped that my cuts had healed or disappeared. I discovered that real fantasy was difficult and dirty. I'd also discovered I was not a hero. A hero would have had a talisman that made the whole listen to her. At least she would have remembered that a nod meant you were an idiot. The path I used had been taken over by huge yellow machines and workers in yellow hard hats. My pine grove was gone. Arrow was gone. That's all you get. The rest is in here. Thank you.
What about the language? I mean, did you have to write out a whole alphabet?
I didn't do all that, not being Tolkien, but what I do with words is I sort of go to a particular language. I can't remember if this was Basque or Croatian, but something really oddball. Mm-hmm. And then I say, all right, I need a word that means leader and it sounds obnoxious. So I find the word and then I fool with it. And then I get fooled. And then, yes, you have to keep a list because you forget them.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me, some of the insults, what do they mean? I don't remember. It's like I needed a word that sounded really insulting, and I found one, and now I don't remember what it means.
You said you had to do a lot of work to understand a 12-year-old, so what did you do?
She studied me extensively.
It was partly remembering who I was, and it was partly things like, what do you do in middle school? I deliberately made her kind of a dork, so that I didn't have to deal with whatever the current slang and obsessions are, because that's just going to change, and then the whole book would, you know, change. But the real research was what do you study in middle school? Because there's middle school stories and ninth grade stories that get in this. And, you know, what's the curriculum? What's the curriculum in Massachusetts as opposed to New York? You know, so that was really a lot of it.
But you wanted to create sort of an archetypal dork, I think.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And who published this one?
This one is published by a little publisher called Black Rose Writing, which is in Texas. I've had to learn about publishing, and all the interesting little publishers have been subsumed into 5 giants. And they can only afford to publish things that are blockbusters. And
What started the story for you?
I spent a lot of time driving from here to the Boston area, where I grew up and had family and friends. And you drive along, especially when you get on the Mass Pike, and there's like woods along the road, and sometimes you can't really tell if there's houses or anything behind them. And at some point, being bored, I said, who lives in those woods? And then I answered that. And then I said, well, who could possibly see them? Which is how I ended up with Andrea, because I don't think everyone up could see them. We're all too, we know what we see. But when you're younger, you don't necessarily know. So that's where it came from. And it had to be Massachusetts, because that was where I saw the woods, and I grew up there, so I know, you know, stuff about the area. Like Andrea, I did climb pine trees. Has anybody here ever climbed a pine tree? You know what happens to you when you climb a pine tree? You get sap in your hair. I hope so. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.